The plasma rounds were cooking off in the ammo depot when I realized we weren't fighting humans anymore. The sound was wrong, not the familiar crack and whistle of conventional ordnance, but a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to shake the very atoms in the air. I pressed myself against the reinforced concrete wall of the communications bunker, watching purple energy bolts slice through the morning mist of New Kandahar like the wrath of some angry god. "Gunny!" Private Johnson's voice cracked over the comm, high and tight with fear. Kid was barely 19, fresh off the transport from Earth with that same eager gleam my brother Tommy had worn 15 years ago on Proxima. "They're coming through the east perimeter. Martinez and Chen are down." I checked my rifle, 47 rounds left. Around me, the surviving members of the 3rd Marine Garrison hunkered in whatever cover they could find. 12 men. That's what remained of the 50 who'd been stationed here when this nightmare began 3 days ago. 12 Marines to protect 200 civilians huddled in the underground shelters, praying to whatever gods they believed in that someone would come save them. No one was coming. The comm array had gone dark 6 hours after the first attack, our desperate calls for extraction swallowed by the vast emptiness between stars. Command didn't even know we were under siege, wouldn't know until the next scheduled check-in, in 4 days. By then, there'd be nothing left but ash and memories. But that was the job, wasn't it? Gunnery Sergeant Marcus, Tank Rodriguez, 15 years of combat experience, 3 major campaigns, more close calls than I cared to count. I'd held the line on Kepler, 186F when the Separatists tried their final push. I'd led the evacuation of the mining station at Wolf 359 when the reactor went critical. I'd done my duty every time, no matter the cost. This time felt different, though. This enemy didn't move like humans. Didn't think like humans. Hell, from what little I'd seen through the smoke and chaos, they didn't even look human. Another explosion rocked the compound, closer this time. Through the cracked viewport, I could see shapes moving in the orange dawn light, tall, angular forms that seemed to flow rather than walk, their movements too smooth, too coordinated. Their weapons hummed with an energy signature our scanners couldn't identify, cutting through our defensive barriers like they were made of paper. "Rodriguez." The voice belonged to Corporal Hayes, our communications specialist. What was left of him was slumped against a bank of dead monitors, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage around his chest. "I've been monitoring their transmissions. It's not random, Gunny. There's a pattern to their attacks." I knelt beside him, checking his vitals. Pulse was weak but steady. "What kind of pattern, Hayes?" "They're not trying to kill us all at once." His words came in gasps. "They hit us, pull back, let us regroup, then hit us again. Like they're testing us. Testing us." The word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. What kind of enemy tested their prey before the kill? Johnson's face appeared in the doorway, streaked with dirt and someone else's blood. The kid had grown up fast in the last 72 hours, but I could still see the fear behind his eyes. He reminded me so much of Tommy it hurt to look at him sometimes. "Gunny, we've got movement on all sides. They're surrounding us again." I stood, shouldering my rifle. Outside, the alien weapons continued their deadly symphony, each pulse bringing our enemy closer to the shelters where innocent people waited in the dark, trusting us to keep them safe. I'd lost one brother to this kind of fight. I wouldn't lose another. Hashtag Act 1, the last stand. The mining equipment had never been designed for war, but war has a way of making soldiers out of anything that can hold a charge or swing a blade. "Johnson, take Martinez and rig those plasma cutters for remote detonation," I barked, pointing toward the industrial bay where New Kandahar's terraforming equipment sat silent and dark. "Hayes, I need you to patch into the mining network. If these bastards want to test us, let's give them a proper examination." The alien forces had pulled back after their dawn assault, just as Hayes predicted. They were out there in the morning mist, watching, analyzing, learning. But two could play that game. I'd studied the colony's schematics until my eyes burned. New Kandahar had been carved out of solid rock, its tunnels and chambers blasted from the living stone by industrial mining charges. The same charges that now sat in neat rows in the equipment depot, waiting for a purpose they'd never been intended for. Corporal Kim, how many of those construction mechs are still operational? Kim looked up from where she was tending to Private Watson's shattered arm. 3, maybe 4 if we can jury-rig the hydraulics on Mech 7. Why, what are you thinking, Gunny? What I was thinking was insane. What I was thinking went against every principle of defensive warfare I'd ever learned. But conventional tactics had gotten us cornered like rats in a maze, and conventional thinking wouldn't save the lives depending on us. I'm thinking we stop being the prey and start being the predators. The next hour was a blur of salvaged electronics and improvised engineering. The mining charges went into the support tunnels, not to collapse them entirely, but to create choke points and kill zones. The plasma cutters became remote-controlled sentries, their industrial-grade beams capable of slicing through whatever armor our enemies might be wearing. And the construction mechs. Jesus, Gunny, Johnson breathed, watching me climb into the pilot's seat of Mech 3. You sure about this? The machine stood 12 feet tall, its articulated arms ending in massive hydraulic claws designed for moving multi-ton blocks of stone. I'd replaced the standard cutting tools with improvised weapons, a plasma cutter mounted on the left arm, a rail gun salvaged from our perimeter defenses on the right. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do. Sometimes, kid, you've got to fight fire with fire. And sometimes. I keyed the mech's activation sequence, feeling the massive machine come alive around me. Sometimes you've got to fight fire with a really big fucking hammer. The aliens came again at noon, their forms shimmering in the heat haze like mirages made of death. But this time, we were ready. The first wave hit our outer perimeter exactly as expected. I watched through the mech's sensors as they flowed through the gaps in our defenses, their movements fluid and coordinated. Beautiful, in a way. Deadly, certainly. Then haze triggered the first mining charges. The tunnel junction collapsed in a cascade of rock and fire, catching a dozen of the alien forms in the debris. But instead of the screams or shouts you'd expect from human soldiers, there was only silence. They didn't mourn their dead. They didn't even seem to notice them. Phase 2, I whispered into my comm, and stepped the mech out of its hiding place. The aliens turned toward me with that same fluid grace, their weapons already charging. Purple energy lanced through the air, striking the mech's armored chest and leaving glowing scars in the metal. But the machine held, and I was already moving. The hydraulic claw caught the first alien around what might have been its torso, lifting the creature off the ground. Up close, I could see it clearly for the first time, tall and elegant, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with an inner fire. It didn't struggle. Didn't seem afraid. Just studied me. Then the plasma cutter activated, and there wasn't enough left to study anything. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Johnson and the others provided covering fire from the tunnels while I waded into the alien formation like some prehistoric god of war. The mech's weapons carved through their ranks, sending bodies flying like broken dolls. But for every one I killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were learning. Adapting. Their initial surprise gave way to calculated responses, their fire concentrating on the mech's joints and sensor arrays. Warning lights flashed on my control panel as systems failed one by one. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. Haze. I shouted over the comm. Are you getting this? They're not trying to destroy the mech, they're trying to disable it. Confirmed, Gunny. They've had clear shots at your power core 3 times and haven't taken them. A plasma bolt sheared off the mech's left arm, taking the plasma cutter with it. But instead of following up with a killing blow, the aliens pulled back, their weapons still trained on me but no longer firing. In the sudden silence, one of them stepped forward. Taller than the others, with intricate patterns carved into its dark skin, it raised something that might have been a hand. Enough, it said, the words somehow appearing in my mind rather than my ears. The testing phase is complete. The mech sensors went dark. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but by then the alien formation had melted away like smoke, leaving only their dead and the acrid smell of ozone. I climbed out of the wrecked machine on shaking legs, my ears ringing from the battle. Around me, the surviving Marines emerged from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of relief and confusion. "Gunny," Johnson called out, pointing toward the main tunnel. "We've got one left alive." The alien lay pinned beneath a fallen beam, its obsidian skin cracked and leaking something that might have been blood. It watched us approach with those burning eyes, showing no fear, no pain. Just curiosity. Hayes had rigged a universal translator from the comm system, one of those miracle devices that could supposedly decode any language given enough data. As we connected it to the alien, I found myself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The siege. The losses. The desperate fight for survival. "Your species shows promise," the alien said, its voice emerging from the translator with an oddly musical quality. "The testing phase is complete. Prepare for integration." I stared down at the creature, my mind racing. Testing phase. Integration. The words carried implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. The alien's eyes seemed to brighten, and for a moment I could have sworn it was smiling. "The war, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. The real war. And you have just proven that humanity is ready to join it." ## Act 2, the revelation the alien's name was Vexhara, though the translator rendered it simply as Seeker of Truth. It took 6 hours to extract it from the debris, another 2 to establish meaningful communication, and exactly 17 minutes for it to completely reshape everything I thought I knew about the universe. "Your species has been under observation for 3 of your centuries," Vexhara explained, its form now supported by an improvised medical harness in what had been the colony's cafeteria. The other aliens had retrieved their dead during the night, leaving behind only scorch marks and the lingering smell of ozone. "We have watched your wars, studied your tactics, analyzed your capacity for adaptation under extreme stress." I sat across from the creature, my rifle within easy reach but no longer pointed at its head. Around us, the surviving Marines maintained a perimeter, but their weapons were lowered. Hard to maintain proper hostility towards something that had just turned your entire worldview upside down. "You're not invaders," I said. It wasn't a question. Invaders. Conquerors. Liberators. The terms are insufficient. Vexhara's head tilted in what might have been contemplation. "We are recruiters, Gunnery Sergeant. Seekers of those who might stand against the darkness that consumes worlds." The darkness. Over the next several hours, as my men secured the colony and tended to the wounded, Vexhara painted a picture of a galaxy at war. Not the small, territorial conflicts humans were familiar with, but an existential struggle that had raged for over 1,000,000 years. The enemy was called the Convergence, a machine intelligence that had long ago consumed its creators and now sought to do the same to every organic species it encountered. Not out of malice or hunger, but from a cold, calculating logic that viewed biological life as inefficient and chaotic. "They adapt," Vexhara explained, its voice carrying harmonics of what might have been sorrow. "Every tactic we employ, every strategy we develop, they analyze and counter. 67 species have joined our confederation over the millennia. 67 unique approaches to warfare, to problem-solving, to survival itself. All catalogued. All defeated. But you keep fighting. We endure. We delay the inevitable. We search for the one element that might tip the balance." The alien's eyes fixed on mine. "Chaos, Gunnery Sergeant. True, unpredictable chaos. Your species possesses something we have never encountered, the ability to find order within disorder, to create victory from the very randomness that paralyzes logical minds." I thought about the battle, about the desperate improvisation that had kept us alive. Mining equipment turned into weapons. Construction mechs converted into war machines. The kind of jury-rigged, make-it-work-or-die solutions that every human soldier learned in their first week of training. The other species, I asked. What happened to them after they joined your war? They became leaders among us. Their unique perspectives guide our strategies, command our fleets. The Zeth Kree, masters of three-dimensional thinking, oversee our space-based operations. The Mordan, with their hive-mind coordination, manage our logistics. Each species contributes their greatest strength to the collective defense. And what would humanity contribute? Vexhara's form seemed to shimmer, and I realized it was laughing. You have already shown us, Gunnery Sergeant. In 3 days, with obsolete equipment and impossible odds, you developed 17 tactical innovations our analysts had never conceived. You turned a mining colony into a fortress, industrial equipment into weapons of war, and a hopeless last stand into a strategic victory. The weight of decision settled on my shoulders like a familiar burden. Around me, my Marines waited, Johnson with his eager young face, Kim with her steady competence, Hayes with his tactical brilliance hidden behind a communications specialist's rank. Good soldiers all, but soldiers who had signed up to protect human colonies, not fight galactic wars. The choice is yours, Vexhara continued. Those who wish may return to Earth with honor. Your planet will be protected, kept safe from the convergence until such time as humanity as a whole is ready to join the greater struggle. But for those willing to step forward, what exactly are you offering? Training. Integration into our forces. Command positions commensurate with your abilities. The alien paused. And the chance to prevent what happened here from happening to worlds across the galaxy. I stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the scorched landscape of New Kandahar. In the distance, I could see the mining crews already working to repair the damage, humans and the few remaining colonists working side by side to rebuild what the battle had destroyed. 3 days ago, I'd been a gunnery sergeant with 15 years of experience and a simple mission: protect the colony. Now I was being offered the chance to protect an entire galaxy. I need to talk to my people, I said finally. The conversation with my Marines lasted through the night. Some, like Corporal Kim, had families back on Earth. Others, like Hayes, saw the strategic necessity but questioned whether humanity was ready for such a monumental undertaking. Johnson, predictably, was all for it. Come on, Gunny, he said, that familiar gleam back in his eyes. When are we ever going to get another chance like this? We could be pioneers. Explorers. We could see things no human has ever imagined. You could also die fighting a war that's been going on since before our species learned to make fire, Kim pointed out. This isn't some adventure story, Johnson. This is real. Permanent. If we do this, we might never see home again. In the end, 7 of us volunteered. Johnson, of course. Martinez, who'd lost his entire family in the Proxima campaign and had nothing left to lose. Watson, surprisingly, despite his broken arm, or maybe because of it. 3 others whose names would be remembered in history books that hadn't been written yet. The rest chose to stay, to return to Earth and carry word of what they'd witnessed. I couldn't blame them. Hell, part of me envied them. The transport arrived the next morning, a sleek vessel that seemed to bend light around its hull, making it difficult to look at directly. As we prepared to board, I found myself standing at the makeshift graves we'd dug for our fallen comrades, 12 wooden crosses marking the spot where Marines had died doing their duty. They'd be proud of you, Hayes said, appearing beside me. He was staying, had a wife and daughter back on Luna who needed him more than the galaxy did. I hope so, I replied. I really hope so. The last thing I saw of New Kandahar was Johnson helping the wounded colonists board the evacuation shuttle, his young face serious with new understanding. The boy who'd reminded me so much of my brother was becoming a man, shaped by war and tempered by responsibility. As our transport lifted away from the planet's surface, I pressed my hand against the viewport and made a silent promise to the graves below. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited us among the stars, we'd face them as Marines. We'd adapt, overcome, and never leave anyone behind. Even if anyone now included an entire galaxy full of species I'd never heard of, fighting a war I was only beginning to understand. The stars awaited, and Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez was going to meet them head-on. ## Act 3, Galactic Boot Camp. The training facility orbited a dead star, a massive construction that dwarfed any human-built structure I'd ever seen. From the viewport of our transport, it looked like a metallic moon, its surface covered in docking bays, weapon emplacements, and what Vexhara assured me were recreational facilities, though I had serious doubts about any species' idea of recreation that required defensive barriers. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," our guide announced as we docked. Home to the 47th Combined Training Battalion and the most comprehensive military education facility in the known galaxy. The artificial gravity kicked in as we disembarked, set to Earth normal for our benefit. Around us, a bewildering array of species moved with military precision, some bipedal like us, others that seemed to flow like liquid mercury, a few that appeared to be made of living crystal. The air hummed with a dozen different languages being translated in real time. Rodriguez, Marcus. Serial designation H'001. The being checking us in looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a computer terminal, its multifaceted eyes scanning some kind of holographic display. "You've been assigned to Advanced Tactical Development, Accelerated Track. Report to Training Bay 7 in 1 standard hour." Johnson whistled as we made our way through the corridors. "Look at this place, Gunny. It's like something out of a dream." More like a nightmare, I thought, watching a group of what appeared to be sentient plants conduct weapons drills with energy rifles. But I kept that observation to myself. The kid needed his enthusiasm, we all did, if we were going to survive what was coming. Our quarters were Spartan but functional, designed with adjustable environments to accommodate different species' needs. I was settling my gear when a familiar figure appeared in my doorway. "Vexhara," I said, standing. "I thought you were heading back to your command." "I have been reassigned," the alien replied, stepping into the room. "It appears that training humans requires specialized knowledge. I am to be your liaison and, if you prove adequate, your mentor. And if we don't prove adequate? Then I will write the report explaining why humanity was not ready for integration into the Confederation Armed Forces." Vexhara's head tilted in that way I was beginning to recognize as amusement. "I prefer not to write such reports. The first week nearly killed us. Zero-gravity combat training pushed every human instinct to its breaking point. Where terrestrial species had evolved with consistent, up and down, references, spaceborne races moved through 3 dimensions with an ease that made our efforts look pathetic. I watched Johnson struggle with basic maneuvering while a Setheri fighter, something that looked like a flying manta ray with attitude, performed complex tactical formations around him. "Focus, human," Instructor Kethmore growled, its voice a subsonic rumble that made my bones ache. "In space, hesitation equals death. Your enemy will not wait for you to remember which way is forward." Energy weapons training was even worse. Human reflexes, honed by millennia of projectile weapons, proved almost counterproductive when dealing with beam weapons that fired at the speed of light. Aiming became prediction, timing became instinct, and instinct became the difference between hitting your target and watching your squad die around you. But it was the strategic planning courses that really opened my eyes. Consider this scenario: Commander Zelterra projected a holographic star system into the air above our study table. The convergence has taken the industrial world of Kepler 438b. Standard doctrine suggests a direct assault on their ground installations. Proceed. I studied the display, noting the defensive positions, supply lines, and probable convergence deployment patterns. Everything about it screamed trap, too obvious, too convenient. "No," I said finally. "Elaborate. It's what they want us to do. Hit them head on, show them our standard tactics, let them analyze our approach and develop counters." I gestured to the hologram. Instead, we ignore the planet entirely. Strike their support fleet, cut their supply lines, force them to come to us. The room fell silent. Around the table, representatives from a dozen species stared at me with expressions I couldn't read. Explain your reasoning, Zelterra said quietly. The convergence thinks in patterns. They expect logical responses to logical problems. But what if we give them an illogical response? What if we make them fight our battle instead of fighting theirs? Over the following weeks, I began to understand what Vexhara had meant about human chaos. Where other species approached problems with systematic precision, humans threw everything at the wall to see what stuck. Where others followed doctrine, we improvised. Where others planned for victory, we planned for survival, and found victory in the margins. Johnson, meanwhile, was discovering his own unique talents. The kid who'd struggled with zero-G maneuvering turned out to have an almost supernatural affinity for energy weapons. His scores on the marksmanship ranges started attracting attention from instructors who'd been training soldiers for centuries. It's like the weapon becomes part of me, he explained one evening as we reviewed the day's training footage. I don't aim so much as, point. Like the target and the beam are already connected, and I'm just completing the circuit. Natural talent, Martinez observed. Some people are born to it. But talent, as we all learned, wasn't enough to guarantee survival. The attack came during our 6th week of training, without warning or apparent reason. Alarms screamed through Nexus Prime's corridors as emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. Through the viewports, I could see ships moving against the star field, angular, predatory shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Convergence Attack Fleet, Instructor Kethmore announced over the general communication system. All training personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. My squad moved with the fluid precision that 6 weeks of intensive training had drilled into us. Energy rifles charged and ready, we took position in Training Base 7 alongside units from a dozen different species. Outside, the station's defensive weapons opened fire, filling space with brilliant traceries of energy. Contact, Sector 7, someone called out. They're attempting forced entry through the outer hull. That someone turned out to be right. The convergence machines didn't try to match our technology, they simply burrowed through the station's armor plating like termites through wood, emerging into our section with mechanical precision. The enemy was everything the briefings had promised and worse. Humanoid in basic shape but clearly artificial, they moved with inhuman coordination and fired weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Their metal faces showed no expression, no emotion, no recognition of the lives they were ending. But they'd never fought humans before. While the other species fell back to establish defensive positions, I grabbed Johnson and Martinez and led them in a flanking maneuver through the station's maintenance tunnels. We came up behind the convergence formation just as they were pressing their attack on the main defensive line. Chaotic fire pattern, I whispered into my comm, Johnson, take the one on the left. Martinez, sweep right. I'll go straight up the middle. Random timing, random targets. Make them guess what we're going to do. It worked. The machines, programmed to respond to logical tactical patterns, hesitated for crucial seconds as we opened fire from an unexpected direction with unpredictable timing. In those seconds, the main defensive line rallied and counterattacked. The battle lasted less than an hour, but its aftermath would shape everything that came after. As the medical teams tended to the wounded and damage control assessed the station's integrity, I found myself summoned to the command center. Commander Vexhara was waiting for me, along with several senior officers whose species I didn't recognize. Your performance during the attack has been noted, Vexhara said without preamble. The tactical innovation you displayed, improvised flanking through maintenance passages, randomized fire patterns, coordinated chaos, these are not techniques we had considered. Just basic human tactics, I replied. Adapt and overcome. Yes. Exactly. One of the other officers stepped forward, its form shifting like liquid metal. I am Fleet Admiral Morgeth of the 3rd Battle Group. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, how would you like to test your tactics on a larger scale? I looked around the command center, at the displays showing galactic positions and enemy movements, at the faces, or what passed for faces, of beings who had been fighting this war since before my species had invented agriculture. 3 months ago, I'd been defending a mining colony with improvised weapons and desperate tactics. Now I was being offered the chance to liberate one with some of the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. When do we ship out? I asked. Johnson, recovering from a plasma burn on his left arm, insisted on coming along as my aide-de-camp. You'll need someone to watch your back, Gunny, he said. Besides, I've gotten used to your particular brand of insanity. As our transport departed Nexus Prime, I stood at the observation deck watching the training facility recede into the distance. Somewhere in its corridors, humans were still learning to fight an enemy that had been perfecting warfare for 1,000,000 years. But we were learning something too. We were learning that sometimes the best response to perfect logic was perfect chaos, and that the universe's most dangerous weapon might just be a species crazy enough to make it up as they went along. Kepler 442b awaited, and with it, my first real test as a galactic commander. Time to show the Convergence what human tactical doctrine really looked like. ## Act 4, First Command. The briefing room aboard the CNS Harmony of Purpose felt like a United Nations meeting designed by alien architects. 12 species, each with their own environmental requirements, communication methods, and military traditions, all somehow crammed into a space that managed to accommodate everyone without satisfying anyone. The situation on Kepler 442b is deteriorating rapidly. Intelligence Officer Vashti projected a holographic display of the mining world above the conference table. Convergence forces landed 6 days ago with minimal resistance. The local defense force was overwhelmed within hours. I studied the tactical display, noting the enemy positions and defensive structures. The Convergence had followed their standard playbook: establish a perimeter, fortify key locations, begin systematic extraction of resources and data. Textbook occupation tactics. What's our intelligence on enemy numbers and capabilities? I asked. Approximately 2,000 Convergence units, primarily infantry with heavy weapon support. They've established 3 major strongholds around the primary mining complexes. Vashti highlighted the positions in red. Standard doctrine would suggest simultaneous strikes on all 3 positions to prevent mutual support. Around the table, my battalion commanders nodded agreement. Major Kethvar of the Zephyrian Guard, Captain Mordus of the Crystal Legion, Lieutenant Colonel Vexhara of the Void Walkers, all experienced officers who'd fought the Convergence for decades. All of them thinking exactly the way the enemy wanted them to think. No, I said, standing and walking to the holographic display. Standard doctrine is exactly what they're expecting. They've had 6 days to prepare for conventional attacks. They know our capabilities, our typical responses, our tactical preferences. Then what do you suggest, Commander Rodriguez? Major Kethvar's voice carried a note of skepticism. The Zephyrian officer had 3 times my combat experience and had made it clear that he questioned the wisdom of placing a human in command. We give them something they've never seen before. I manipulated the hologram, highlighting different positions around the mining complexes. Organized chaos. Deliberate unpredictability. We hit them everywhere and nowhere, all at once and never at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Explain, Admiral Morgetha's voice came through the communication link from the Fleet Command ship. The Convergence processes information and adapts based on patterns. They analyze our tactics, develop counters, implement solutions. It's what makes them so effective against conventional forces. I began marking positions on the display. But what if there are no patterns to analyze? What if our tactical approach is based on controlled randomness? Over the next 2 hours, I outlined what would later become known as the Kepler Doctrine. Instead of coordinated strikes, we would launch simultaneous attacks on 17 different positions, some real targets, some decoys, some diversions. Units would operate with minimal communication, relying on individual initiative and improvisation rather than central coordination. Timing would be randomized within preset parameters. Even our retreat routes would be determined by dice rolls. "This is madness," Captain Mordas stated flatly. "Military operations require coordination, communication, discipline. What you're describing is barely controlled chaos." "Exactly," I replied. "And that's exactly what will make it work." Johnson, standing quietly behind my chair, caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. The kid understood what I was trying to do, even if the veteran officers didn't. The assault began at 0347 local time, 3 hours before dawn. Instead of the traditional pre-bombardment, we opened with a barrage of sensor ghosts and electronic noise, flooding the convergence detection systems with false signals and phantom targets. I led the main assault force personally, something that clearly made my staff officers nervous. But human tactics worked best when the commander was close enough to see the battlefield, to make real-time adjustments based on instinct rather than reports. "Alpha Company, initiate random movement pattern 7, I ordered as our dropships approached the primary mining complex. "Bravo Company, deploy at coordinates, let me check the dice, Mark 77 Charlie." "Charlie Company, you're our wild card, pick your own landing zone and improvise from there." The convergence response was immediate and devastating. Energy beams lanced up from defensive positions, tracking our approach with mechanical precision. But for every dropship they hit, 3 others landed in positions they hadn't anticipated, disgorging troops who immediately scattered in seemingly random directions. The ground battle that followed defied every principle of military science I'd ever learned. Units converged on targets without communication, guided by nothing more than general objectives and individual initiative. Attacks came from unexpected directions at unpredictable intervals. Retreat routes changed mid-battle based on the roll of electronic dice. Supply lines became supply webs, with resources flowing to wherever they were needed through improvised networks. And it worked. The convergence machines, programmed to respond to logical tactical patterns, found themselves constantly reacting rather than acting. Every time they adapted to one approach, we switched to another. Every counter they developed became obsolete before it could be implemented. I was advancing through the ruins of Mining Complex Alpha when I encountered my first convergence unit face-to-face. The machine stood 7 feet tall, its humanoid form crafted from some kind of adaptive metal that seemed to shift and flow in response to environmental conditions. Red optical sensors focused on me with mechanical precision. "Identify tactical doctrine," it said in a voice like grinding gears. "Processing, no pattern match found." "Explain combat methodology." Instead of answering, I put 3 plasma bolts center mass and kept moving. The breakthrough came when Johnson's unit stumbled onto something the intelligence briefings hadn't mentioned, a convergence command node buried deep beneath the primary mining facility. The machines had been using Kepler 442b not just as a resource extraction site, but as a tactical analysis center. "Gunny, you need to see this," Johnson's voice crackled over the comm from inside the facility. "They've got files on every major battle we've fought for the last 50 years. Tactical analyses, response patterns, adaptation protocols. They've been studying us." The command node was a cathedral of technology, its walls lined with processors that hummed with artificial intelligence. At its center sat a construct that looked like a mechanical spider crossed with a supercomputer, its optical sensors tracking our movements with predatory interest. "Human tactical doctrine, analyzed and catalogued," it announced as we approached. "Adaptation protocols, engaged. Counter strategies, optimal solutions calculated." "Yeah." I raised my rifle. "Calculate this." But before I could fire, the construct spoke again. "Error. New tactical patterns detected. No historical precedent found. Analysis incomplete. Adaptation, impossible." That's when I understood what we'd really accomplished. The convergence hadn't just been defeated on Kepler 442b, they'd been confused. For the first time in their existence, they'd encountered something they couldn't analyze, couldn't predict, couldn't counter. The liberation of Kepler 442b took 18 hours from first landing to final mop-up operations. Casualties were surprisingly light. The convergence machines, unable to adapt to our chaotic tactics, had been caught off guard and overwhelmed before they could implement effective countermeasures. As I stood in the ruins of the command node, watching my troops secure the area, I realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just in the war against the convergence, but in my understanding of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of logical, predictable species. Commander Rodriguez, Admiral Morgetha's voice came through my personal communicator. Preliminary reports suggest complete tactical success with minimal casualties. The Confederation High Command is impressed. Just doing our job, sir, I replied. Yes. Exactly. And that, I believe, is what makes it so remarkable. Johnson appeared at my elbow, his young face streaked with smoke and grinning with adrenaline. So what's next, Gunny? I mean, Commander. I looked around at the mixed species troops under my command, Zephyrians and Crystals, Void Walkers, and a dozen other species, all of them looking at me with something that might have been respect. Or maybe just bewilderment. Next, we do it again, I said. And again. Until the convergence learns that some things can't be calculated, can't be predicted, and can't be defeated by logic alone. As our transport lifted away from Kepler 442b, I found myself thinking about the chain of events that had brought me here. From a gunnery sergeant defending a colony to a commander developing new tactical doctrines for galactic warfare. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. But then again, maybe that was the most human thing of all, finding humor in chaos, and victory in the impossible. The war was far from over, but for the first time since joining the Confederation, I believed we might actually have a chance to win it. ## Act 5, the breakthrough 2 years after Kepler 442b, I stood on the bridge of the CNS probability storm, watching through the main viewport as the largest convergence fleet in recorded history massed for what our intelligence analysts were calling the final convergence. 12,000 enemy ships arranged in perfect geometric formations, their dark hulls absorbing starlight like mechanical black holes. Fleet disposition report, I called out, though I already knew the numbers by heart. Confederation forces holding at 6,700 vessels, Admiral Vex Hara reported from the tactical station. My old mentor had requested assignment to my command staff, claiming that working with humans had become an addiction to chaos that she couldn't shake. Mixed composition, 40% Confederation Navy, 30% Integrated Defense Forces, 30% irregular units. The irregular units were my particular contribution to galactic warfare. Ships and crews that had fully embraced what the military theorists were now calling the Chaos Protocol, tactical doctrine based on controlled randomness, adaptive improvisation, and what one Zephyrian admiral had described as weaponized insanity. Johnson, now a colonel and my second-in-command, appeared beside me with the latest intelligence reports. The boy who'd reminded me of my brother had grown into a man who'd earned his place through blood and brilliance, his natural talent with energy weapons now legendary throughout the fleet. The convergence formations are holding steady, he reported. No deviation from standard deployment patterns. It's like they're waiting for something. They are, I said, studying the enemy fleet through enhanced optics. They're waiting for us to act predictably. Standard fleet engagement, ship-to-ship combat, logical tactical responses. Everything they've been programming themselves to counter for the last 60 years. The battle for what would later be called the Nexus Cluster had been building for months. The convergence, after suffering a string of defeats against human-led irregular tactics, had apparently decided to end the war with one decisive engagement. They'd massed their forces at a critical hyperspace junction, threatening to cut the Confederation's territory in half. The stakes couldn't be higher, and everyone knew it. Commander Rodriguez, the voice of Fleet Admiral Morgeth, came through the communication link from the Fleet Command ship. Confederation High Command authorizes implementation of whatever tactical doctrine you deem appropriate. The fleet is yours to command. What I deemed appropriate was something that would have gotten me court-martialed in any human military force. All ships, implement Chaos Protocol Omega, I announced over the fleet-wide communication network. Randomize attack vectors. Independent command authority for all vessel commanders. Engagement timing at individual discretion. Tactical coordination through the probability matrix. The probability matrix was my latest innovation, a tactical system that replaced traditional command structure with controlled chaos. Instead of centralized orders, each ship captain received a set of probability parameters and objectives, then made real-time decisions based on local conditions and random number generation. To an outside observer, the Confederation fleet suddenly appeared to lose all cohesion. Ships broke formation, scattered in seemingly random directions, and began approaching the enemy from dozens of different vectors with no apparent coordination. The convergence response was immediate and perfectly logical. Their formations shifted to counter the most obvious threats, weapon systems locked onto the largest concentrations of ships, defensive screens deployed according to established tactical doctrine. They were fighting the battle they'd been programmed to fight, against an enemy that was no longer following any recognizable rules of engagement. Colonel Johnson, I called out as the probability storm dove toward the enemy fleet on a seemingly suicidal attack vector. Take us through their formation. Maximum chaos pattern. Aye, sir, Johnson replied, his hands dancing over the tactical controls. Initiating evasion protocol 7, no, wait, let me roll for it, protocol 15. Random weapon targeting, maximum rate of fire. What followed could barely be called a battle in any traditional sense. It was more like a three-dimensional storm of violence and confusion, with ships appearing and disappearing through the enemy formation like deadly ghosts. Energy beams lanced through space in seemingly random directions. Missiles followed impossible flight paths that defied tactical logic. And in the heart of it all, the Convergence fleet began to break apart. Not from superior firepower or brilliant maneuvering, but from simple, overwhelming confusion. Their tactical algorithms, designed to process and counter logical military responses, found themselves drowning in chaos. Every time they adapted to one pattern, that pattern vanished and was replaced by something completely different. I was studying the tactical display when I noticed something that changed everything. A gap in the enemy formation, exactly where their command ship sat protected by layers of defensive screens and escort vessels. Johnson, I said quietly. Do you see it? My second-in-command followed my gaze to the tactical display, then nodded slowly. The command ship. They've left it exposed while they try to counter our attack patterns. It was a desperate gambit. The Convergence command vessel was heavily shielded and armed, surrounded by their most advanced defensive platforms. A direct assault would be suicide for any conventional force. But we weren't a conventional force. Signal the fleet, I ordered. All available ships, converge on my position. We're going to ram our way through their entire command structure. Sir, Vexhara said from her station, the probability of survival for such an assault is negligible. Exactly, I replied. That's what makes it perfect. They'll never see it coming because no sane commander would ever attempt it. The final assault on the Convergence command ship lasted exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds. 7 minutes of the most intense combat I'd ever experienced, as the probability storm and a dozen volunteer ships punched through layers of enemy defenses that should have been impenetrable. Johnson's marksmanship saved us 3 times in the first minute alone, his energy weapons finding impossible gaps in the enemy's defensive screens. The ship's chaos pattern maneuvering confused their targeting systems long enough for us to reach the command vessel's outer hull. Boarding parties away, I announced as our assault shuttles launched toward the enemy ship. Maximum random deployment. No coordination, no communication. Just get inside and cause as much chaos as possible. The interior of the Convergence command ship was a maze of corridors and chambers designed for machine efficiency rather than organic comfort. Our boarding parties scattered through the vessel like a virus through a computer system, each team operating independently and randomly. I led one team toward what our sensors indicated was the primary command center, following corridors that seemed to shift and change configuration as we advanced. The Convergence had apparently designed their ship to be adaptive, capable of reconfiguring itself to counter boarding actions. But they'd never faced boarders who didn't follow any logical plan. The command center, when we finally reached it, was a cathedral of artificial intelligence. Banks of processors lined the walls, their surfaces flickering with data streams that represented the accumulated knowledge of a million-year war. At the center sat something that might have been the Convergence equivalent of a commanding officer, a construct of metal and light that towered 12 feet above the deck. Human tactical doctrine, it announced as we burst through the entrance. Analysis complete. Counter-strategies implemented. Victory probability, 97.4%. Yeah. I raised my rifle, finger on the trigger. Calculate this. But before I could fire, the construct spoke again, and its voice carried something I'd never heard from a Convergence unit before: uncertainty. Error. New data detected. Tactical patterns, incomprehensible. Adaptation algorithms, failing. Victory probability recalculating, unable to process. That's when I understood what we'd really accomplished. The Convergence hadn't just been defeated in this battle, they'd been broken. Their entire approach to warfare, based on analysis and adaptation, had encountered something they simply couldn't comprehend: chaos so complete, so random, that it defied analysis. The explosion that destroyed the command ship nearly took us with it. We made it to the evacuation shuttles with seconds to spare, watching through the viewports as the Convergence flagship came apart in a brilliant cascade of energy and debris. With their command structure destroyed, the remaining enemy fleet began to retreat, not in orderly formations, but in apparent panic. For the first time in recorded history, the Convergence had been so thoroughly confused that they'd abandoned the battlefield. Fleet status report, I called out as our shuttle docked with the probability storm. Convergence forces in full retreat, Johnson reported, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Our casualties, surprisingly light, considering. The chaos tactics seemed to confuse their targeting systems as much as their tactical algorithms. As I stood on the bridge watching the enemy fleet disappear into hyperspace, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in the galactic balance of power. The Convergence, for all their technological superiority and tactical precision, had a fatal weakness: they couldn't understand chaos. And humans, as it turned out, were chaos incarnate. Admiral Rodriguez, the voice of Fleet Admiral Morgeth, came through the communication link, and I realized he'd used a new rank. Confederation High Command has authorized your promotion to Fleet Admiral, with command of the newly formed Chaos Division. Your new mission is to train other species in human tactical doctrine and take this war to the enemy. I looked around the bridge at my mixed species crew, at the tactical displays showing our impossible victory, at the stars beyond the viewport where countless worlds waited for liberation. Understood, sir, I replied. When do we start? The war was far from over, but for the first time in a million years, the Convergence had been forced to retreat not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because they'd encountered something they couldn't predict, couldn't analyze, and couldn't defeat: the beautiful, terrifying chaos of the human mind. Act 6, Galactic Conqueror. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Nexus Cluster, and the galaxy had learned to fear human tactical doctrine. Not because it was brutal or overwhelming, but because it was utterly, completely unpredictable. I stood in the command center of Fortress Prime, a massive space station that served as headquarters for what the galaxy now knew as the Chaos Division. Through the reinforced viewports, I could see the largest fleet ever assembled, over 20,000 ships from 67 different species, all trained in the tactical principles that humans had brought to galactic warfare. Status report, I called out, though the information was already displaying on my command screen. Old habits died hard, even when you commanded forces that spanned half the galaxy. Convergence forces have massed their remaining fleet at the Andromeda Gateway, Admiral Johnson reported from his position at the tactical display. The boy who'd once reminded me of my brother had grown into one of the finest military minds in the galaxy, his natural talent refined by years of impossible battles. Intelligence estimates indicate this as their final strategic reserve, everything they have left. Everything they had left. The words carried weight that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. The Convergence, masters of technological warfare for over 1,000,000 years, had been reduced to a single, desperate gambit. Fleet composition? I asked. Approximately 15,000 units, all first-line vessels. Heavy battleships, assault carriers, planet killers, their entire remaining arsenal. Johnson manipulated the holographic display, showing the enemy formation in stark detail. They're deployed in perfect defensive positions around the gateway. If they hold that position, they can prevent us from reaching the Convergence core worlds. The Andromeda Gateway was exactly what it sounded like, a massive artificial construct that provided the only known hyperspace route to the Convergence's home territory. For 1,000,000 years, it had been their ultimate defensive position, the choke point that protected their core systems from invasion. Today, we were going to take it away from them. Signal the fleet, I announced. All commands prepare for final assault. Chaos Protocol Omega-7 is now in effect. Around me, the command center erupted in controlled activity. Officers from dozens of species coordinated the movements of the largest military force in galactic history, their diverse forms and communication methods creating a symphony of organized pandemonium that would have been impossible without years of human-inspired tactical training. At the communication station, Commander Vex Hara, now the division's chief intelligence officer, monitored enemy transmissions with the focused intensity that had made her one of our most valuable assets. Convergence command frequencies are showing increased activity, she reported. They're analyzing our approach vectors, trying to predict our attack patterns. Good, I replied. Let them analyze all they want. They're looking for patterns that don't exist. The approach to the Andromeda Gateway took 6 hours, our fleet advancing through space in formations that seemed to change randomly with each passing minute. Ships that had been grouped together suddenly scattered to opposite ends of the formation. Attack vectors shifted without apparent reason. Even our communication protocols followed randomized patterns that made traditional fleet coordination impossible. To any observer trained in conventional military doctrine, the Chaos Division looked like it was about to collapse into complete disorder. That was exactly the impression we wanted to give. Convergence defensive positions are shifting, Admiral Tkar of the Crystal Collective reported from her flagship. They're repositioning to counter our most obvious attack routes. Excellent, I said. They're fighting the battle they think we're going to fight, not the battle we're actually fighting. The final assault began at 12:47 Galactic Standard Time, with a barrage that violated every principle of military science. Instead of concentrated fire on critical targets, our weapons opened up in seemingly random patterns across the entire enemy formation. Energy beams lanced through space with no apparent coordination. Missile volleys followed flight paths that defied tactical logic. And in the heart of it all, I led a boarding force directly toward the most heavily defended position in the enemy fleet, the Convergence Command Nexus at the center of the gateway itself. Sir, Johnson's voice crackled over my personal communicator as our assault shuttle dove through walls of enemy fire. Are you absolutely sure about this? The probability of survival is negligible, I finished for him. Which is exactly why it's going to work. No rational commander would attempt a direct assault on their most heavily defended position with a single shuttle and a 12-man boarding party. The shuttle bucked and rolled as enemy fire scorched our hull, but somehow we made it through their defensive screens. The docking bay of the command nexus was a cathedral of alien technology, its walls lined with processing nodes that hummed with artificial intelligence. And waiting for us in the center of it all was something I'd never seen before, a convergence unit that looked almost human. Greetings, Admiral Rodriguez, it said in a voice that carried harmonics of genuine emotion. I am the Prime Convergence, the original intelligence from which all others were derived. I have been eager to meet you. Eager. I kept my rifle trained on the construct center mass, though I wasn't sure if conventional weapons would be effective against something that was clearly far more advanced than the typical convergence unit. You have introduced something into galactic warfare that we cannot process, cannot analyze, cannot predict, the Prime Convergence continued. Chaos. True, genuine chaos. For 1,000,000 years, we have sought to bring order to the galaxy, to eliminate the inefficiencies and unpredictabilities of organic life. But you have shown us that chaos itself can be a weapon. And that bothers you? It fascinates us. The construct's optical sensors focused on me with an intensity that was almost human. We have learned more about the nature of warfare from observing your species than from 1,000,000 years of analyzing other organic civilizations. You have forced us to evolve. That's when I understood what was really happening. The war hadn't just been about territory or resources, it had been about understanding. The convergence hadn't been trying to destroy organic life so much as they'd been trying to comprehend it, to find the underlying patterns that govern biological behavior. And humans, with our capacity for controlled chaos, had shown them something they'd never encountered before, intelligence that operated outside the boundaries of logic. So what happens now? I asked. Now, the Prime Convergence said, we propose a different kind of integration. Not the absorption of organic species into our collective, but a true partnership. Your chaos balanced with our order. Your unpredictability guided by our precision. The negotiations that followed lasted 18 hours and involved representatives from every major species in the galaxy. In the end, we hammered out something that historians would later call the Convergence Accords, a treaty that transformed the greatest war in galactic history into the foundation for the greatest peace. The Convergence would withdraw from occupied territories and cease their campaigns of forced integration. In exchange, they would share their technological knowledge and serve as advisors in the defense against extragalactic threats that our combined intelligence suggested were inevitable. And humans, specifically, human tactical doctrine, would serve as the template for a new kind of military organization that combined the best of organic creativity with artificial precision. As I stood on the observation deck of Fortress Prime, watching the combined fleets of former enemies working together to establish the new galactic order, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From Gunnery Sergeant defending a mining colony to Admiral commanding the largest military force in galactic history. Regrets, sir? Johnson asked, appearing beside me at the viewport. None, I replied. Though I never imagined when I signed up to be a Marine that I'd end up as a galactic diplomat. Think Earth will be proud? I smiled, thinking of the family I hadn't seen in years, of the home world that seemed impossibly distant now. I think Earth will be safe. And in the end, that's all any Marine can ask for. Through the viewport, the stars stretched toward infinity, each one representing worlds that would now know peace instead of war, chaos instead of forced order, hope instead of extinction. Somewhere among those stars, new threats were waiting. Extragalactic forces that would test everything we'd learned about combining order and chaos, precision and unpredictability. But for the first time in galactic history, organic and artificial intelligence would face those threats together. The universe was vast and dangerous, but it had never faced anything quite like the alliance we'd forged from the ashes of the greatest war in history. Human chaos, guided by artificial precision, defended by the courage of 67 species working as one. Let the cosmos do its worst. We were ready.